We'll get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم بارك لنا في جمعنا هذا. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مباركا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم انفعنا بالقرآن العظيم. اللهم ارفعنا بالقرآن العظيم. اللهم اجعله لنا إماما ورحمة وقائدا وسائقا إلى رضوانك. البسنا به الحلل وأسكننا به الظلل وادفع عنا به النقم. اللهم ادفع عنا بالقرآن العظيم النقم. اللهم ادفع عنا بالقرآن العظيم النقم. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يقرأه فيرقى ولا تجعلنا ممن يقرأه فيشقى. اللهم اجعله لنا في الحياة مؤنسا اللهم اجعله لنا في الحياة رفيقا وفي القبر مؤنسا وعلى الصراط نورا ومن النار سترا وحجابا. اللهم اجعلنا من أهل القرآن الذين هم أهلك وخاصتك. أدبنا بأدبه خلقنا بأخلاقه واملأ قلوبنا وبيوتنا بنوره ورحمته ووداه. Oh Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you to bless us with the love of your book. Oh Allah, bless us with the guidance of the Qur'an. Elevate us by virtue and by the blessings of the Qur'an. Guide us by the blessings of the Qur'an and guide our children by the blessing of the Qur'an. We ask you, O Allah, to make the Qur'an a companion for us in our lives and a comforter for us in our graves and an intercessor for us on the Day of Judgment. O Allah, we ask you to make us of those who live by its clear verses and believe in its unclear verses. We ask you, O Allah, to make us of those who have the character of the people of the Qur'an and to fill our hearts and our homes with its abundant mercy and guidance. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen, ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd. I pray that you're all doing well. Jazakumullah khair for attending today. Whether you're in person or joining us from Facebook or YouTube. This is a gathering in which we're going to discuss more verses from the Qur'an and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the best of that, the best of the understanding, the best of the reflection, and the best of the action based on the Book of Allah. And as I said before, this is, insha'Allah ta'ala, we pray to Allah to make this effort sincerely for Him, accepted by Him, and if so, it is one of the gardens of Jannah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِذَا مَرَرْتُمْ بِرِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ فَارْتَعُوا. If you pass by the gardens of Jannah, then sit in those gardens. So then they asked the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا رِيَاضُ الْجَنَّةِ. What are the gardens of Jannah? He said, حِلَقُ الذِّكْر. They are the gatherings of remembrance. And there's no greater remembrance than the remembrance in the Qur'an. This is أفضل الذِّكْر because it is kalamullah. It is the words of Allah Azza wa Jal. And in it is the most profound wisdom of our Creator that He sent to us. So we're going to get right into it, but I want you to really take that meaning in, to realize that this gathering isn't just like any other gathering. There's a beautiful hadith that tells us, and we're going to discuss a little bit more about the angels, but this hadith tells us one of the functions of angels. And that hadith is, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ مَلَائِكَةً يَطُوفُونَ فِي الطُّرُقِ يَلْتَمِسُونَ أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ فَإِذَا وَجَدُوا قَوْمًا يذكرون الله تنادوا هلموا إلى حاجتكم قال فيحفونهم بأجنحتهم إلى السماء الدنيا. This is a beautiful hadith. This tells us that there are a type of angels that traverse the earth. And there's another version of this hadith that says إِنَّ لِلَّهِ مَلَائِكَةٌ سَيَّارَةٌ. Their role is to travel the earth and search for gatherings of remembrance. So when they find people who are remembering Allah, they say to each other, هَلُمُّوا إِلَى حَاجَتِكُمْ. We've found exactly what we're looking for. Come for what you've been looking for. هَلُمُّوا إِلَى حَاجَتِكُمْ. So then they surround this gathering all the way to the height of as-sama'i dunya. That's something powerful and spiritual. Anyone with a sense of spirituality, if we realize this, it'll make me be very heedful of who's in my presence. I'll sit very carefully. I won't be extending my legs. I won't be sitting disrespectfully. I won't be talking, I won't be distracted, not because of the person speaking, forget about the person speaking, because of the words of Allah that are being shared and remembered. So this is a reminder, as we always do in the beginning of our sessions, and I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to benefit us with that. The 2 surahs, we don't have much time, we don't want to take too long. Hopefully an hour, if not, an hour and 15, max, no more than that. So the 2 surahs that I want to get through today are Surat An-Nazi'at and Surat Abasa. These are the next 2 surahs in Juz' Amma. And very, very, very thought-provoking surahs. As we mentioned, by the way, both of them Meccan. And as we said, this is one of the features of Meccan revelation. Very thought-provoking verses, very succinct, to the point, very deep in meaning. And we're going to start off with that depth of meaning with Surat An-Nazi'at, because it's the next surah. But before we get into it, again, we want structure in what we're studying. So that's why what I'm trying to do is give an overview of each chapter before we get into it. That way we have a roadmap. And if I was you, I would suggest taking note of those objectives, that overview, because it's highly important. Sometimes you find some of that in this book here. Again, this is one of the nice things about this book. Again, it doesn't have much content, but one of the nice things that it does do is it puts together the themes, and then it shares with you the translation. So it gives you the themes of Surat An-Nazi'at within six points, and it mentions it here. I'm going to mention to you my own points that might sort of overlap with the points in the book. Those are 5 points that we should take note of in terms of Surat An-Nazi'at. The very first one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishing various roles for angels and giving us a certain connection with the roles of angels. So the first one is the roles of angels. That's the beginning of Surat An-Nazi'at, according to one of the tafasir, and we'll discuss that. The second one is a unique description of the Day of Judgment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives it 2 names in this surah. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. He describes it as a rajifa. And He also describes it as a tammatul kubra. Right? And the next surah is going to describe it as a sakha. There's a lot to think about in terms of the names that Allah gives to the Day of Judgment. What does rajifa mean? Just so you know, it is the great quake. It's like an earthquake, a very violent shake that will bring everything out of the ground and flatten the surface upon which judgment will happen. It will be utterly flat, as another verse that we'll mention describes. So number 2 is a description of the Day of Judgment. And of course there's many surahs with a description of the Day of Judgment, but this one is uniquely tailored. As we said, there's always a special theme for the surah. So, Ar-Rajifa, At-Tammatul Kubra, what does that mean? The great calamity. The great calamity. Right? So, and then the third thing is, it addresses why do people reject? What is one of the greatest reasons for rejection of truth? That's number 3 in terms of the greater issues this surah addresses. Why do people reject? Number 4, what is the remedy to this common cause of rejection? That's number 4. Number 5, delaying punishment isn't because of inability. These are certain objectives that this surah highlights. Delaying punishment isn't because of inability, because of ajz. It's not because of that. Right? Now let's see how Allah describes this. But before we get into that, if you look at the book, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He breaks it down like this. First 5 verses, oaths regarding the Day of Judgment. Then 2 is a description of the Day of Judgment. And then 3 is quoting a mockery, the mockery of the disbelievers. And then 4 is a lesson is given through the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. And 5 is logical reasoning proving the possibility of judgment. And 6 is discussing certain aspects of the Day of Judgment. That's what he says. Now, you'll find unique benefit in both. And inshallah, we're going to get into the details now. What is the details of the beginning of this surah? But first off, I want to address an important question. Is the Qur'an repetitive? Is the Qur'an redundant? Of course, we as believers, we would never describe the Qur'an as redundant, because that would be disrespect and it would be to undermine the words of Allah. However, there may be a lingering thought in the back of your mind as to why these concepts keep on getting repeated. The concept of resurrection, concept of Day of Judgment, and the proof of the Day of Judgment. This is not just in Surat Al-Nazi'at. It's in many surahs of the Qur'an. Now, it's always important to note that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in each of these different situations something to reflect on, a different angle. The concept might be one, but the benefits it has are numerous, or the angles you could look at it are multiple. And that's something to consider. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to emphasize something, He repeats it in many different scenarios. Like, take a look at the example of taqwa. You see, taqwa as a concept, God consciousness, is mentioned over 200 times in the Qur'an. 200 times. That's a lot of verses. And that goes to show you how far-reaching the effect of the concept of taqwa is. It's mentioned the context of belief and faith. It's also mentioned the context of accepting the message of the prophets. It's also mentioned in the context of divorce. It's also mentioned in the context of inheritance. It's mentioned in so many different contexts, this concept of taqwa. And that just shows you how foundational the concept is. So, and that's not the only wisdom behind repetition. In fact, this is a genre among the sciences of the Qur'an. أسباب التكرار في القرآن الكريم. Books have been written just about this one issue. Why is there repetition in the book of Allah? Like when you look at the stories of the prophets, that's when you find a lot to think about as to why, for example, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam is the most mentioned prophet in the Qur'an. He's mentioned around 130 something times, I think 136 times. And then the second most mentioned prophet after him is who? You guys should know, or hopefully know. Who's the second most mentioned prophet? Ibrahim alayhi salam, mentioned 69 times. Right? Then Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, in the range of 30, more or less, a little more or a little less than that. Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, mentioned how many times? 4 times as Muhammad, 1 time as Ahmad. 5, because one of his names is Ahmad, as the Qur'an mentions, Muhammad, Ahmad. Right? And these repetitions, again, all serve the greater themes that they're plugged into. Like if you want to go find the early life of Musa alayhi salam, there is a surah that you go to for that. Anyone here know that? Where's the early life of Musa alayhi salam? Musa alayhi salam, it's only mentioned in a lot of detail in one surah. A lot of detail. Surat Al-Qasas. Early life of Musa alayhi salam. Alright. And if you want to go to the later life of Musa alayhi salam, was a story. So the early life is younger years. If you want to go with the story, so there's 2 chapters, right? Musa and Fir'aun, and Musa and Bani Israel. Later life, Musa and Bani Israel. Now you find it in a number of surahs. But early life of Musa, Surat Al-Qasas. Why? Why? What's the profound wisdom behind? There's a wisdom behind that being mentioned there. Because Surat Al-Qasas is giving the Prophet ﷺ correlations with the life of Musa. And then in the end of the surah, Allah is telling him, O Prophet, just as you're leaving this town, Mecca, you're going to come back to it. Just as Musa alayhi salam, when he left the town in his younger years, he came back as a prophet and messenger. When he was younger, when he killed, that's the reason why. The verse in the end of the surah is, إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. The one who has revealed to you this Qur'an is going to bring you back here once again. This was revealed to the Prophet as he was leaving Mecca, and he was looking back at it, and he was saddened by leaving this beloved land to him. Again, when people look at the Qur'an, if they don't understand it, they're going to feel like there's a lot of randomness. But I guarantee you, with thought and reflection, you will find in each of these locations in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses one of those universal concepts like taqwa or day of judgment or resurrection or so on and so forth, you'll find in it unique benefit that's not anywhere else. That's our belief in the book of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. What does this surah start with? So it is among the chapters in Juz' Amma, it is the first one we're coming across that's starting off with oaths. And you know there's a lot of surahs in this chapter that starts off with oaths, with qasam, the concept of qasam. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. This is an oath. This is وَالضُّحَى. This is an oath. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. This is an oath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath by time, a certain framework in time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath in this verse, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ, by a certain reality that relates to the origin of this word. Again, like I advised you last time, I recommend that you have the verses in front of you. That way it'd be easier to understand what I'm saying. So if you have a phone or something, or you could go to Qur'an.com and open the translation in front, it's going to help you. It's going to help you follow along. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. What does nazi' come from? Nazi', as they say, refers to al-ikhraj wal-jadhb. It is to violently extract something. It's not just to remove something. It's different than akhraja. Naza'a. It involves the application of force in the removal of something. And here, the context of what's being referred to, according to many of the scholars of tafsir, is the extraction of souls from the body. Now here's something to think about. You will find, if you go back to the books of tafsir, go back to Tafsir ibn Kathir or Tafsir al-Sa'di, like I said, in terms of the English audience, the availability of tafsirs in English is limited. One of the good tafsirs that has some detail is Tafsir al-Sa'di. You could find it, it's published, it's published by IIPH, International Islamic Publishing House. Sorry? It's on Google. Yeah, if you want to buy it, you could buy it on Amazon. You could also find a PDF copy. It's available online. So Tafsir al-Sa'di or Tafsir ibn Kathir or whatnot. But if you go back to there, you're going to find different interpretations. And sometimes when people see differing opinions, it confuses them. Like why? Why can't it just be clear cut? Why does it have to be a number of possibilities? Are these mufassirin just making things up? No, one of the beautiful things you'll find in the reality of tafsir and Qur'anic interpretation is that these interpretations are complementary. They're complementary, they're not conflicting. This is part of ikhtilaf al-tanawwu'. Because all of these suggestions that the scholars of tafsir make are in themselves established by other evidences in our deen. However, these outlooks that can be derived from either narrations or Arabic language or whatnot, they don't necessarily conflict with each other. So one of the prominent tafsirs of these first verses is it's telling us functions of the angels. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. And this is speaking about those angels that are responsible with extracting the bodies from the souls from the bodies, right? And when you describe it as nazi', it actually causes a great deal of concern. What was the last verse in the previous surah? What was the last verse in the previous surah? You guys know, in the end of Surat An-Naba, who has it memorized? يَوْمَ يَنْظُرُ الْمَرْءُ مَا قَدَّمَتْ يَدَاهُ وَيَقُولُ الْكَافِرُ يَا لَيْتَنِي كُنْتُ تُرَابًا. After establishing resurrection, without a doubt with clear evidences that we discussed last time, Allah is sending Allah is sending clear address to those who disbelieve in resurrection. Be careful. Not all souls are the same when they leave the body. Souls are all going to leave the body. Some of them are going to leave it in a violent fashion. And that's where nazar comes about. So he says here, فَأَقْسَمَ اللَّهُ بِالْمَلَائِكَةِ لأنها من أشرف المخلوقات وخصها بهذا الوصف الذي هو من تصرفاتها تذكيرا للمشركين إذ هم في غفلة عن الآخرة وما بعد الموت. He says Allah is speaking about angels here because it is among Allah's most noble creations, and it is mentioning a specific role of angels, and that is the extraction of souls from the bodies to remind the disbelievers in resurrection. Again, there's a continuity here. There's one of the genres of ulum al-Quran that involves tanasub al-suwar wa tanasub al-ayat. So we mentioned one genre earlier. It is the causes of repetition in the Quran. A second genre is the correlation between chapters and the correlation between verses. These are two different focuses. What does this surah have to do with that? Surat al-Naba hands off to Surat al-Nazi'at. After resurrection is established, pay attention. The beginning of your journey to the afterlife starts with the extraction of the soul. That's the correlation between Surat al-Naba and Nazi'at. The beginning of the journey to the afterlife starts here. Resurrection is going to happen. This is how it starts. So this is beautiful continuity between the surahs. And they say that gharqa, what does that refer to? Gharqa refers to what? Al-gharaq, what is al-gharaq? Gharaq is to drown. There's a certain effect, a certain experience that someone who is drowning feels, and that is, utter suffocation. An inability to breathe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us intricate description. It's referring to this process of extraction of the soul as having a similar effect. A similar effect in the sense that the person will utterly be helpless and the soul will no longer be within the person's control. Now that's when the body might start shaking. The person might start making sounds, as is known at death. The eyes might start moving. You know, one of the hadiths that say that the individual, when the soul is leaving the body, the eyes follow the soul. And that's why the eyes roll upward. This is a hadith in Sahih Muslim that establishes this reality. So pulling out the souls of the disbelievers. This is one interpretation. Or it's referring to something very different. It's referring to a naz'a in the sense of transitioning from one place to another, speaking about the heavens above, the stars. So where did they get this tafsir versus that one? Very different. You see, but again, there's no real conflict, because ultimately Allah is giving us a great deal to reflect on. But this first one is something that I'm much more comfortable with, as you could see, for the clear continuity between the verses. Then Allah tells us about something else. وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. Again, role of angels. The angels are doing nazar, aggressive extraction, and they're also doing nashit. What does nashitat refer to? Someone who is nashit is someone who is what? Someone who knows Arabic. Energetic, right? So someone who's energetic freely flows forward without restriction, goes immediately out. This is referring to the angels. What they help the believer do at the moment of soul extraction. What are they doing? They're encouraging the believer. They're encouraging the believer, come out. Come out. Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna. Yeah, come out. Oh, tranquil soul. Ukhruji ila Rabbin Rahimin Rahman Ghayri Ghadban. Come out to a merciful Lord who's not angry with you. That's what nashitati nashta means, right? The angels, they entice the believer. Come out. You're not going to be harmed. You're not going to be punished. And there's actually a hadith that established this. As for the believers, it says, the hadith says, إن الميت تحضره الملائكة فإذا كان الرجل الصالح قال اخرجي أيتها النفس الطيبة كانت في الجسد الطيب اخرجي حميدة وأبشري بروح وريحان ورب غير غضبان فلا يزال يقال لها ذلك حتى تخرج ثم يعرج بها إلى السماء. This is about the hadith of the transition to the afterlife. It's a long hadith. Can't share it all now. But this hadith tells us about the beginning of the journey for the soul of the believer. Nashta, right? Coming out very easily. The angels are there and they're calling out to this righteous soul, اخرجي أيتها النفس الطيبة, come out, O pleasant soul, to that was in a blessed body, pleasant soul in a blessed body. اخرجي حميدة, come out, praiseworthy, come out to the bliss and na'im of Allah's pleasure, بروح وريحان, and to a Lord who's not angry with you. So then the soul comes out very easily, just as the hadith says, goes on to mention, just as al-qatr, just as a water drop, very easily comes out. As for the kafir, as the hadith goes on to mention, the disbeliever, it's a very different reality. The angels come out. This is the beginning of a journey of a painful accountability. Again, all coming from choices, because Allah doesn't oppress people. وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. But one of the names of the Day of Judgment in another surah, Surah Ghafir, is Yawm al-Hasra. Yawm al-Hasra. The day of great regret. And it's also referred to as Al-Azifa. Al-Azifa. So Yawm al-Hasra, the day of great regret. And that regret starts here, from النزع والنازعات غرقا, and then والناشطات نشطا. And the verse, there's another verse that gives us more detail. Again, you take both sides. For those who have a lot of wisdom and insight, Allah gives the verse very short and lets them reflect. For those who need more explanation, Allah gives explanation. There's another verse that gives more detail. It's in Surah Al-An'am, verse 93. Surah Al-An'am, verse 93. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ أَخْرِجُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. And if you could only see, take a look at this. If you could only see when the oppressors are in the midst of their death, and the angels are extending their hands, وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ أَخْرِجُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Come out. You're going to be judged now. So the beginning of Al-Hasra starts here. The beginning of the great regret starts when the soul starts exiting the body. Ya Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us when we reach this point. But you see the profound reality of the Qur'an. You go from nazi'ati gharqa, nashitati nashta. Who can do such eloquent expression? 2 words explain, give us such profound wisdom that needs to be explained in how long? Spent like 20 minutes on it, or 15 minutes just on these 2 words in each of these verses. Whereas another verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, not all people are the same in terms of their understanding and perception. You need detail? Here's detail. Here's pages of detail. That's the beauty of the Qur'an. So then the 3rd verse after that is وَالسَّابِحَاتِ sabha. And sabh, what does that refer to? Swimming, floating. Al-awm, they say وَالسَّبْحُ هُوَ الْعَوْمُ وَهُوَ التَّنَقُّلُ الْجِسْمِ عَلَى وَجْهِ الْمَاءِ. Here, there is something else being referred to, another function of angels. Alright, we're done with the whole concept of resurrection. Soul extraction. We're done with that. What other things do angels do? وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. That's what we said in the beginning. In the beginning of today's session, we mentioned that there are angels. Their whole role is to float around this earth. They traverse it. They pray for the believers. They assist the believers. There's many roles. One of these roles is istighfar. الذين يحملون العرش من حوله يسبحون بحمد ربهم ويؤمنون به ويستغفرون للذين آمنوا. One of their roles is seeking forgiveness for believers. Another role for angels is sitting in gatherings of knowledge and listening to knowledge. Another role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions for angels is writing down everything you do. And that's going to come in one of the surahs we do. Another role is kiraman katibin. يَعْلَمُونَ مَا تَفْعَلُونَ. They're writing your deeds, every single one of them. Another role for angels is, not now, at the time of resurrection, bringing the bodies out of the ground and steering people to the place of qiyamah. That's another role. سَائِقٌ وَشَهِيد. Another role for angels is to question people in their graves. Nakir and munkar. That's their role. Another role for angels is to sound the hour, Israfil, to blow into the trumpet for the last hour. Another role for angels is to bring messages to the prophets. There's many roles. Another role for angels is to protect people from harm that wasn't meant to befall them. لَهُ مُعَقِّبَاتٌ مِّن بَيْنِ يَدَيْهِ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِ يَحْفَظُونَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ. He has angels in front of him and behind him, protecting him by the will of Allah. Accident's about to happen, it's not meant for this person. So, I'm going to protect him from that accident. Right? And hakada, many roles. وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. It's telling us about a beautiful function for angels, and that is to fill this universe and this earth with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. And then another role for angels is to make sure that guidance is not tampered with. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Ya Allah. This verse, look at it. He says, Sayyidina Ali, he said this, هي الملائكة تسبق الشياطين بالوحي إلى الأنبياء عليهم السلام. This is the angels making sure that, so there's two meanings here, two beautiful meanings. Both of them are roles of angels. What does sabq mean? To race, to beat something, right? To outdo another. So one of the meanings is the angels outdo the shaitan, because the angelic, we have angelic inspiration, right? There's angelic inspiration for believers. And then there's satanic inspiration. The angels try to stop the believer from engaging in sinfulness by ilham, by inspiration. And then there's satanic inspiration. وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. The shayateen, they inspire their associates to argue with you. So again, this is the force of the angels and the force of the devils collides, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the force of truth outdo the force of falsehood. So this is one meaning. The other beautiful meaning, this was mentioned by another scholar of tafsir, is هي الملائكة تسبق بأرواح المؤمنين إلى الجنة. That tells us the rest of this hadith. It is the angels hastening the souls of believers to Jannah. And you know, when the soul leaves the body, where does it go? It's elevated, it goes up. And the angels begin to announce the best titles that this person had during his life or her life. The sincere person, the generous person, the benevolent person, the person who fortified ties of kin, the person who was good to parents, the person who was kada, kada. They begin to sing his praises, and then when he reaches a high station, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, return the soul of my servant to the earth and open for him a gate to Jannah, and then the person will experience the na'im of Jannah and his grave until the day of judgment. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Now this is a beautiful, beautiful beautiful meaning. Wherever you go, you're not going to find something wrong between these two meanings. So there's something unique to pay attention to here. We have wa and then fa, right? وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا is the last of these. Is there a difference between the wa and fa? Yeah, there is. We're going to mention that right now, inshallah. He says, what do the mudabbirat mean? المراد بالمدبرات الملائكة فتدبيرها نزولها بالحلال والحرام وتفصيله. This is speaking about the details of the guidance that comes down. That the angels bring down guidance to the Prophet Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. This is مُدَبِّرَاتِ. Tadbir means preparation. That's what tadbir means. مُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. If you look at this book here, it'll tell you, then direct the affairs of the world. That direct the affairs of the world. This is referring to life and livelihood. Life and livelihood. The angels are not only there at the time of soul extraction, they're not only there to assist the believers and pray for the believers, they're also there to bring guidance to people upon this earth. فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. What's the difference between the waw and the fa? Beautifully, both of them, by the way, they are referred to as tools of atf. And what atf means is just like and, the word and in English. So that's like you're connecting one meaning with a previous meaning, one meaning with the previous meaning. However, when we use waw, it is usually to refer to something that is independent of what was previously mentioned. When we use waw, it is, as he says here, هي صفات مستقلة لموصوفات مختلفة الأنواع. And when it is with fa, it is صفات متفرعة عن الوصف. He says, so when you have وَالنَّازِعَاتِ يَرْقَى, this is referring to something independent. And then وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا, this is referring to something independent of what was previously mentioned. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا, this relates to what was mentioned before. And it does, right? So what did we say was وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ refers to? What did we say? What did we say? What does وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا refer to? The angels exciting and enticing the soul of the believer to come out, right? What's the verse after that? فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. What did we say it refers to? What did we say it refers to? I know there's a lot of detail. What does it refer to? It refers to racing, right? فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Go ahead. What is it? It is, one of the meanings we said, it's the angels, they hasten the soul of the believer to Jannah. تَسْبِقُ بِرُوحِهِ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. So 2 and 3, do they relate with each other? Verses 2 and 3, do they relate with each other? No? How do they not? Yes. The believer's soul comes out enticed and excited, and then the angels take it quickly to Jannah. You get it? 2 and 3, they relate to each other, right? 1, does it relate to what's after it? No, it's dependent. 1 is referring to the extraction of the soul of disbelievers. 2 and 3 is talking about the soul of believers, right? فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. What's after that? فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. Again, this is also tadbir al-hidayah. This is also relating to believers. That's why these 3, so waw, fa, because it's all talking about the same thing, right? That's why. The first one was mentioned with waw, and then the second one was mentioned with waw because they're 2 separate things. That's the path of the disbelievers. This is the path of the believers. And the believers, their situation with their soul extraction is XYZ. Right? فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Right? So we actually missed a verse. وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. This is an independent thing. It's not relating to either subject. This is talking about the angels traversing the earth. So that's just a fine note. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you could always ask. I could mention it again in the end. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. Again, we want to get through both surahs. So let's cover some ground. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةِ. And he says here, as for the day of judgment, it starts out in a very scary way. It's so scary that everything will violently shake. We have another surah, Surat Zalzala. It's going to go over this violent shake in detail. And because of this violent shake, what happens? Everything, وَأَخْرَجَتِ الْأَرْضُ. Some very scary verse. Very, very profound description. The earth will release and expel all of its burdens. All of its burdens. The oppressor and the oppressed. The oppressor and the oppressed. The one who lost his life in tragic circumstances. The one who lost it due to no wrongdoing of another, but drowning مثلا, or burning, or their home collapsing upon them, or a natural disaster. All of these burdens will be brought out from the earth, and the souls will be put back in the body again. So he says, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. The beginning of the Day of Judgment is going to start out not in an easy way. It's going to start out with a violent shake. تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةِ. After it will come what's going to come after it. الرَّادِفَةِ is something يَرْدِفُ الشَّيء. What comes next? الْوَاقِعَ بَعْدَهَا. What is this? How does this violent shake start? It actually starts with Israfil blowing the second time in the trumpet. Right? يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. This is describing الصَّيْحَةِ أو النَّفْخَةِ الثَّانِيَةِ لإسرافيل. And the Prophet ﷺ would remember this in the middle of the night. Again, if that's how it's going to start, I should be preparing myself. Because again, when there's a ruckus, imagine this. If you've ever been in a situation where you don't know where to go, and people are just scrambling left and right, and there's loud sounds, and there's a lot of concern, you should imagine that when you imagine the Day of Judgment. The Prophet ﷺ would do that every night. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا ذهب ربع الليل قام وقال يا أيها الناس اذكروا الله جاءت الراجفة تتبعها الرادفة جاء الموت بما فيه. So then the Prophet ﷺ actually here was reminding us. He would say this every night. After a fourth of the night has gone, he would call out and he'd say, "Oh people, remember Allah. Remember Allah. Al-Rajifa has come." Al-Rajifa is this great quake. Why is he saying that? He's saying that because death is near. Death is near. As soon as death happens, then this whole process of Qiyamah begins. And then he says, that's why he says in the end, جَاءَ الْمَوْتُ بِمَا فِيهِ. Death with all it entails has come. It's at our doorsteps. It's only when, and I've just heard of so many different stories in the past week that just emphasize this. And we always hear about stories like this. Our sister from our community who we buried about a week ago, 33 years old, from cancer. It's been a week. She transitioned. And I heard of another story that happened on Friday, or that was mentioned on Friday in another community, that a younger sister also, 29, passed away from cancer. I heard of another story of a person having a near heart attack, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that he has life. And as such, and many other stories of tragic accidents, of people dying in car accidents. We keep on hearing of them every single week. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, جَاءَ الْمَوْتُ بِمَا فِيهِ. Death came with all that it entails. Death came. That's how we should live our life. And the earth will shine with its Lord. This is something to reflect on. The Prophet ﷺ would remember the reality of al-akhirah, and the Qur'an beautifully describes it as the earth on that day is going to shine by the nur of Allah. وَأَشْرَقَتِ الْأَرْضُ بِنُورِ رَبِّهَا وَوُضِعَ الْكِتَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the earth will shine with the nur of Allah, and the book will be placed. The book of what? The book of actions and everything that happened between people and their relationships upon the surface of this earth. And then the prophets and the martyrs and the righteous ones will all be brought forward. Everyone will be brought forward on that day. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the next verse, قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ أَإِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرَةً قالوا تلك إذا كرة خاسرة فإنما هي زجرة واحدة فإذا هم بالساهرة. These verses, if you read them closely, summarizing, what is Allah saying here? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing to us that on that day, hearts will be trembling with fear. Hearts will be trembling with fear. Have you guys ever awakened from sleep in a very shocking way? Like something very loud happened and it made you jolt forward from your sleep? Have you ever felt this reality before? Raise your hand if you ever felt it. Yeah. How did your heart feel after that happening? Sometimes when it happens, you can make your heart beat really fast. It could be actually very painful. It's actually not very good to do this, to wake up someone suddenly like that. But when that's if someone's yelling at you and wakes you up like that, or something loud bangs as you're sleeping. Can you imagine being in the deep slumber and then the hour sounding, and then billions upon billions of people coming out from their graves. Imagine if you don't know where to go. Imagine if you don't know what's going to happen to you. That's going to be a very terrorizing moment. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَ أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ. The hearts are going to be trembling, and you could see that in the eyes. The eyes are going to be in a state of khushu'. There's going to be a state of sheer terror and concern. أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ. And they'll all be saying, يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ. After this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, they're saying, will we then be brought back to life? They're doubting resurrection. After we're put in our graves, hafr refers to the ground, right? After we're put in the ground, are we really going to come out once again? إِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرًا. When our bones wither away, you're saying that we're going to come back. قَالُوا تِلْكَ إِذًا كَرَّةٌ خَاسِرَةٌ. They said, no, that resurrection is not going to happen. Again, we're going back to the subject of resurrection. Now we're going to be brought into another subject. Allah is reminding us of these realities, saying, come on, you really think that this is not going to happen? Wallahi, it's going to happen. And you either have one of two paths. The path that starts with وَالنَّازِعَاتِ, or the path that starts with وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ. These are the two paths. So He says after this, قالوا تلك إذا كرة خاسرة فإنما هي زجرة واحدة. It'll be like a single blast. Again, correlate this with your reality. If that happened to you, you'd be very terrified. فإنما هي زجرة واحدة فإذا هم بالساهرة. What does sahar mean? You guys know what sahar means? Anyone who knows Arabic? Wakefulness, right? It's to stay awake. No sleeping on the Day of Judgment. No sleeping on the Day of Judgment. No. No one is going to have the capacity to even look left or right. It's going to come with us right now in Surat Abasa about the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, he says that people will be coming forward on the Day of Judgment حُفَاةً عُرَاةً غُرْلًا, naked, no clothing, nothing. No, those expensive clothes that they would adorn themselves with in the dunya, nothing. No expensive clothes. Hufat, they're going to be barefoot. Ura, naked. Ghurla, غير مختونين. Just like the day that they were born. Right? Now, people will be so distracted. They say that Aisha was like, how? How is that going to be? When people, men and women, all in the same area. So the Prophet ﷺ said people are going to be too busy to perceive anything that's happening around them. To the extent that even a mother who's breastfeeding her own child, newborn, is going to forget the baby. وَتَذَلُ كُلُّ مُرْضِعَةٍ عَمَّا أَرْضَعَتْ. What does that mean? It's showing us, emphasizing to us, people are going to be tunnel visioned on that day. Where am I going? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to Jannah or am I going to hellfire? That's the ultimate question. Now, the verses go, فَإِذَا هُمْ بِالسَّاهِرِ. Now let's talk about one of the greatest devastating diseases. This is where we're going to get to. Again, you want to prepare for this transition to the afterlife? Figure this out. Look at what happened to Musa. Look at what happened to Fir'aun, sorry. هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ مُوسَى. Do you know about the story of Musa alayhi salam? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a very abridged depiction of what Fir'aun did. He was told to go to Fir'aun because he transgressed and tell him, will you purify yourself? I'll guide you to your Lord. So he showed him a sign. فَأَرَاهُ الْآيَةَ الْكُبْرى. He showed him obvious signs. فكذب وعصى ثم أدبر يسعى فحشر فنادى فقال أنا ربكم الأعلى. Fir'aun had a fatal disease, and that's arrogance. That fatal disease is arrogance. In this surah, Allah tells us that Fir'aun blatantly said, I am your highest Lord. Now I want you to try to remember everything we said and connect it with this. أنا ربكم الأعلى فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the disgrace of this life and the disgrace of this next life. So Allah mentions arrogance, And then He mentions the cure for arrogance right after that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءِ? Are you a greater creation over the heavens above you? بناها رفع سمكها فسواها وأغطش ليلها وأخرج ضحاها. If you want to be cured from arrogance, the only thing you have to do is open your eyes. Look above. Are you greater than the heavens above? If Allah created all of that, do you think that you are such an impossible being that you can never be brought back into existence? Do you really think that much of yourself, oh human being? That's what Allah is saying. What does arrogance have to do with anything? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, hey, there's certain realities coming your way. And if you want to remain blind of it and rejecting to it, then that can only, not for any logical reason, can only be because of some disease in your heart that's blinding you. That's arrogance. If you want to be cured from it, open your eyes. Look above. Look around. Look at the interchange of the day and night. The verses go on. And then He tells us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after this, وَأَمَّا, and gives us a manhaj haya. Look, these next verses are my favorite verses in the surah. You know, I think that is important with every surah you read. Try to pick which verses are your favorite. What do I mean, which verses are your favorite? You want to bond with the Qur'an. You want to connect with it, right? See which one is unique to you. Favorite means there's some better than others. Are there some verses better than others? No, it's all from Allah. We know this. Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadith. The best speech. But what happens when I start connecting with those words and by actually trying to find which one connects, which one has the deepest impact on me, then I'll start building a more meaningful relationship. These are some of my favorite verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. You want a summary of of this life and all it contains? You want a summary? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it. If you transgress and you prefer the immediate, you're going to go to hell. That's basically what it is. Very plainly. If you prefer the immediate and you get so attached, because you know what, that's what happened with Fir'aun. Fir'aun, what did he become arrogant from? Fir'aun became arrogant because of what? What would you suggest he became arrogant? Because of what? Because of power? Did someone say power? Power and position, definitely one thing. What else did he become? What made him arrogant? The question is, what made him arrogant? Wealth? Yeah, that's definitely a reason. His wealth made him very arrogant. That's very possible for those matters of dunya to cause that to you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us, hey, pay attention. وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. This is what led Fir'aun to what he became. You're going to go to hell. وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. Look at this beautiful expression. Whoever recognizes Allah's status and whoever fears Allah's status. What does that mean? That I realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His dominance and sovereignty over me is absolute. That's very humbling. That's very humbling. وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. And then does what? Don't stop there. Don't just be humble. Don't just be humble. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. And you're able to avoid the devastating effects of whim. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَىٰ. Beautiful, wallahi, beautiful messaging. You don't need books and volumes of things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a clear message. If you're whimsical and you prefer the immediate, you're not going to be guided. And hence, when your soul is extracted, you're going to be in utter regret. If you're humble and you and you realize the status of Allah, and you stop your nafs from violently pursuing its whims, then you're going to go to Jannah. That's the summary of it. And then in the very end of the surah, and we're done with it, at the very end of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes something clear. They ask you when the hour is. Not even you know. No one knows when their hour is. And Allah made it like that intentionally, so that it could be a surprise, that people could prepare for it as an unknown element. فيما أنت من ذكراها إلى ربك منتهاها. What are you, O Muhammad ﷺ, in terms of knowing when the hour is? The Prophet in another verse was told, say, I don't know the ghaib, I don't know the unseen. And if I knew it, then I would have achieved much good and I wouldn't have ever fallen into hardship. وَمَا مَسَّنِي السُّوءُ إِنْ أَنَا إِلَّا نَذِيرٌ وَبَشِيرٌ لِقَوْمٍ يُؤْمِنُونَ. End of Surat Al-Nazi'at. Rest of the time, about 20 minutes, inshallah, dedicated Surat Abasa. Surat Abasa. Surat Abasa. Overview. 5 things. I'm not intentionally seeking 5 things, but it just happens that it keeps on becoming 5 things. So we had 5 in Surat Naba and 5 in Surat Al-Nazi'at, and now 5 in Surat Abasa. And again, by no means is this something very comprehensive. You know, if we wanted to spend days in each of these surahs, we could. But we want to try to finish and cover ground and build an appreciation for the Book of Allah. 5 things, overview. The first part of the story, the surah, is the story of Abdullah ibn Maktum, one of the blind companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Number 2, profound wisdom in da'wah. Surah Abasa teaches us profound wisdom in da'wah. Number 3, Surah Abasa addresses the reality of, am I honored by Islam or do I honor Islam? Like, am I bringing honor to Islam or does Islam bring honor to me? Of course we know the answer to this, but it highlights it in a very eloquent way. Number 4, a summary of existence. This surah, these are my favorite verses in this surah. When we get to number 4, it's my favorite verses in this surah. One line, it's a few verses, but they're very short verses. It's a summary of existence from beginning to end. I love these ayat because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simplifies the journey to the afterlife. One line. You cannot possibly do this. This is only for Allah. One line of words summarizing existence altogether. Beautifully. Number 5, and this is the last one, a description of the selfish reality on the Day of Judgment. Nafsi, nafsi. A description of the selfish reality on the Day of Judgment. When was Surah Abasa revealed? They say, and this is something that Shaykh Muhammad al-Tahir bin Ashur says in his Tahrir wa Tanweer, he says, it is the 24th surah revealed. It was revealed after Surah Al-Najm and before Surah Al-Qadr. Now, of course, Surah Al-Najm it was way before. But you guys know that the order of revelation is different than the order of the Mus'haf. It's very different, of course. So it's the 24th surah revealed. It starts off with mentioning the story, Abasa wa tawalla. He frowned and he turned away. This is going to bring, and this surah, the way I did it is a little different than Nazi'at. I broke this surah down into critical questions. Critical questions. And you could keep a list of these critical questions and put answers to them. One of the critical questions that we're going to address is, can prophets sin? Can prophets sin? Number 2 is, did the Prophet ﷺ make a mistake in judgment? In judgment. By choosing to focus on the nobleman, who was, by the way, remember his name, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, according to most tafsirs, as again is mentioned in the Tahrir wa Tanweer. Did he make a mistake in judgment? That's critical question number 2. Critical question number 3 is, what was the story and who was Abdullah ibn Maktum? So we're actually going to start with number 3 and we're going to go back to 2 and 1, inshallah. What's the story? The story is reported in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, and it says, أنزل عبس وتولى في ابن مكتوم الأعمى أتى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فجعل يقول يا رسول الله أرشدني وعند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رجل من عظماء المشركين فجعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعرض عنه ويقبل على الآخر ويقول أترى بما أقول بأسا فيقول لا ففي هذا أنزل. So here, take a look at this. The cause of revelation, it was about the blind man, Abdullah ibn Maktum. He said to the Prophet, O Prophet, guide me. Give me guidance, arshidni. And the Prophet ﷺ had one of the nobles of the mushrikeen. What did we say his name was? Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. Remember his name. He's a very important figure. He's one of the most knowledgeable among the mushrikeen. And there's a certain set of verses that were revealed concerning him in the 29th chapter. You guys know which surah? Which surah? إنه فكر وقدر في أي سورة؟ المدثر. Yeah, المدثر. Alright? ذرني ومن خلقت وحيدا وجعلت له مالا ممدودا وبنين شهودا. This is talking about Al-Walid. All of this is about Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. So anyway, the story was that he came to the Prophet and the Prophet was trying to give da'wah. So then the Prophet ﷺ was turning away from him and focusing on Al-Walid. The Prophet ﷺ actually was a little upset with how Abdullah ibn Maktum is disrupting his communication with Al-Walid. Because Al-Walid is a very important person to the mushrikeen. If he believes, then many people might believe and follow him. This is how the Prophet ﷺ was judging the situation. Now we're gonna dissect it and see what's here. Now, who was the mother? He mentions the mother of Abdullah ibn Maktum. Her name was Atika. And she was from Bani Makhzum. Bani Makhzum is one of the most noble Arab tribes from Quraysh. It's one of the most noble Arab tribes from Quraysh. And if you notice, he's named a little differently than the average name. His name literally says, Abdullah, the son of Maktum, the son of the mother of Maktum. Why? What's this? Why is he even named this? So they say actually that Al-A'ma yukanna anhu bi Maktum. Maktum means blind. It's like a title that they used to use to refer to someone who is blind. Is not he has amal basar. And Maktum, why did they mention his mother, not his father? Because his mother was from a very noble tribe, and so nisbatan ila ashrafi abaway. That's how they used to do it before Islam. It's a very unique reality because his mother was very noble and his father was not from a reputable tribe. And this is not an Islamic reality. This is not like Islamic teachings. This is pre-Islamic. This is what his name was. They used to refer to him like this out of the honor of Bani Makhzum. That's what they used to do before Islam. A very tribalistic society anyway, but that's why he's called Abdullah ibn Maktum. Maktum is to refer to what? His blindness. It's referred to his blindness. And they mention his mother, not his father, because she was from the more noble family. Abdullah ibn Maktum is one of the special needs companions. Right? Very special. He's very special and very capable and able. A beautiful example for the generations. The Prophet ﷺ loved him. And he mentions this here is كان يحبه ويكرمه وقد استخلفه على المدينة في خروجه إلى الغزوات 13 مرة. The Prophet ﷺ let him be Amir of Medina 13 times from the times that he left Medina. When he would go out to the battles, he would leave someone in charge. Who was this person in charge? Abdullah ibn Maktum. 13 times he appointed him. Other times he actually went out with the Prophet ﷺ. He wasn't someone who just stayed at home and was spoon-fed. No. Abdullah ibn Maktum was actually one of the mu'adhins for the Prophet ﷺ. You know this, right? He used to make adhan for which salah? Which salah did he make adhan for? You guys know? Come on, you have to know. Fajr. He was the mu'adhin for Fajr. This is explicitly mentioned in the hadith because Fajr had 2 adhans, right? Fajr had 2 adhans. Two adhans. Have you guys, is this the first time you're hearing this? Or you know this before? You know this before? The first adhan is before the time, right? False dawn. Who used to make that adhan? Bilal. فَإِنَّ بِلَالْ يُؤَذِّنُ بِلَيْلٍ, as the hadith mentions. So continue to eat and drink until you hear the adhan of Ibn Maktoum. The first adhan was to let them know that, hey, Fajr is going to come in. If you're going to fast, make sure you have your suhoor and you finish it soon. And also to wake them up. So this was about 20 minutes before. وقت الفجر الكاذب, the false dawn. And then Ibn Maktoum would make adhan at the actual Fajr time. And of course, because he was blind, he wouldn't know when to make adhan. They would tell him, they would begin to tell him, asbaht, asbaht. And then he would know that the Fajr has begun. So then he would stand up and he would make adhan. And you know, he was also the flag bearer for the Prophet ﷺ in battles. كان حامل اللواء. And he also, the Prophet ﷺ didn't allow him to miss congregation prayers. These are just some facts about Ibn Maktoum. He came to the Prophet ﷺ one time and he said to him, I have difficulty coming to Fajr. May Allah forgive us. May Allah forgive us. I have difficulty coming to Fajr. And I don't have someone to take me to the masjid. So then the Prophet ﷺ told him, do you hear the call for Fajr? So he said, yes. So he said, فَأَجِبْ. Then you have to respond. No excuse. You have to make it to Fajr somehow. Find a way. Figure it out. Why did the Prophet ﷺ do this? Because Abdullah ibn Maktoum is not an average companion. He was holding him to higher standards. I'm not going to accept the bare minimal for you. No. Figure it out. So this is one of the... And of course, attending Fajr is not a requirement. But again, you're not talking about average people. Even with Abasa wa Tawalla, you're not talking about the average person. You're talking about the most special person, the Prophet ﷺ. There's a lot of beautiful things in the surah that we really need to understand. Let's get back to the surah. There's more about Ibn Maktoum. Anyway, I'll share this. I've been meaning to update the PowerPoint, by the way. Just too much going on. But I'm a little behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these documents as is. Again, most of them are it's largely in Arabic. And until I get a chance, so you don't keep on waiting, and so that you could have a reason to learn Arabic. Most of it's in Arabic. So if you know Arabic, then you'll be able to read it. But if you don't know Arabic, then it gives you an incentive to learn. Until I put it in the PowerPoint, which I'll do soon, inshallah. So anyway, Abasa wa Tawalla. Why mention the frown? Another critical question. Again, maybe like if you're taking notes, if I was you, I'd make a list of the critical questions by themselves. It'll help you reflect on it later on. Why mention the frown? Abasa wa Tawalla. Very first way this is how Allah chose to start the surah. There's two things here. Why mention the frown? Why mention the frown? Now, can a blind man see a frown? Can a blind man see a frown? No, he can't. So now, by the way, if you reflect on this carefully, the Prophet ﷺ's action wasn't very injurious to Abdullah ibn Maktoum. It wasn't very, because he couldn't see. He couldn't see. The Prophet ﷺ didn't curse him, didn't undermine him, didn't degrade him. No, he didn't. He frowned. Ibn Maktoum can't see his frown. وَتَوَلَّى, he turned away. He didn't respond immediately to Ibn Maktoum. What is al-ubus? That is, this is talking about the facial expression of anger and disapproval, right? And then after this, so we said there's two things in this verse. Why mention the frown? This is to lighten it by mentioning the Prophet ﷺ didn't actually severely cause injury because he can't see. Abasa wa Tawalla, he frowned. He didn't do more than this. Don't misunderstand that the Prophet hurt this person. No, he didn't. So the second thing is, why mention it in third person? You ever thought of that? Take a look at these verses. When do we start mentioning second person? Look at the verses. He frowned and turned away when the blind man came to him. But how do you know? Perhaps he would be purified. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. When do we transition to second person in verse 3? Why start in third person? Did you ever think of that? You ever think of that as a critical question? There's a beautiful wisdom behind it. He said, لم يشأ الله أن يفاتحه بما يتبادر منه أنه المقصود بالكلام فوجهه إليه ولما كان صدور ذلك من الله لنبيه على أسلوب الغيبة ليكون أول ما يقرع سمعه باعثا على أن يترقب المعني من ضمير الغائب فلا يفاتحه ليقع العتاب في نفسه مدرجا وذلك أهون وقعا ونظير ذلك عفى الله عنك لما أذنت لهم. A lot of, even if you know Arabic, this is heavy Arabic. What is he trying to say? He started off with third person so that it's not misunderstood as Allah punishing His Prophet or strongly reprimanding His Prophet. No, this is so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gently brings to the Prophet's attention, hey, this is being said in third person because the problem is al-ubus, not you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The problem is the frowning and the reaction, not you, O Prophet of Allah. So this is part of Allah's talattuf and His adab with the Prophet. He could have said, and again, nothing out of order in the Qur'an. Could Allah have not said, Abasta wa tawallayt? Couldn't He have said this? You frowned and turned away. No, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's saying this in a very gentle way to the Prophet. That's beautiful. Third person and then second person. Why? To gently bring to the Prophet's attention something that wasn't a sin, by the way. It wasn't a sin. You're going to realize the logic of the Prophet was very on point. Right? So then he says, this is the same as when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْكَ. This is Surat At-Tawbah verse 43. What did Allah say? May Allah forgive you. عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْكَ. May Allah acquit you. عَفَى Allah, Allah has acquitted you. عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْكَ. لِمَا أَذِنْتَ لَهُمْ. Why have you given permission to the hypocrites to stay behind? Beautiful Qur'anic etiquette between Allah and His beloved Prophet. Allah could have said to the Prophet ﷺ, He could have said to him, لِمَا أَذِنْتَ لَهُمْ قَبْلَ أَنْ آذَنَ لَكَ. He could have spoke to him in such a authoritative and وَلَهُ الْحُكْمِ. He spoke to other prophets like this. He spoke to other prophets. He says, when Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam said, إِنَّ ابْنِي مِنْ أَهْلِي وَأَنْتَ أَحْكَمُ الْحَاكِمِينَ. He said, قَالَ يَا نُوحُ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heavily reprimanded Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. Of course, Sayyidina Nuh is min ulul azm, but in the maqam al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, arfa'. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gently reprimanded His Prophet here. Whereas over there, Allah clearly spoke to Sayyidina Nuh, don't ask me what you have no knowledge of. So this is adab ma'a Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Why mention the frown? Why describe the blind man? Here's another one. This is another critical question. Why call him the a'ma? Why call him the blind man? أَنْ جَاءَهُ الْأَعْمَى. Why call him the blind man? Would you do this? Like if hey, can you go talk to that blind guy over there? How would that sound? How would that sound? Would it sound very respectful or very regarding? Would you call him the blind man? No, it wouldn't, right? But why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use that language? This is to give both of them an excuse, as we said, both of them. Sayyidina Ibn Maktoum, when he did what he did, was he transgressing? He wasn't. So this is, as he says, because he had this excuse, this is ترقيقا للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فهو أجدر بالعناية به. Sayyidina Ibn Maktoum needed more compassion because he wasn't someone transgressing. He didn't mean to do that. That's why he described him as the blind man. Allah doesn't do things like that randomly, right? And then why? What's the other reason? It's because what? It's to give the Prophet ﷺ an excuse too, that he didn't hurt him. He frowned, and he couldn't see that, as we said. Next critical question, so we can get through this surah quickly. Pay attention to the next part. The Prophet's ijtihad, was it misplaced and illogical? Here, أَنْ جَاءَهُ الْأَعْمَى. Then وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى أَوْ يَذَّكَّرُ فَتَنْفَعَهُ الذِّكْرَى أما من استغنى فأنت له تصدى وما عليك ألا يزكى وأما من جاءك يسعى وهو يخشى فأنت عنه تلهى. The next scene is summarized as follows. The Prophet ﷺ was speaking to one of the nobles of Quraysh, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, a disbeliever, not just any disbeliever, a disbeliever with power and influence, who may change the course of the da'wah. And he was approached by a believer, Ibn Maktoum, for general guidance. The Prophet ﷺ saw it as a directive to focus on the disbeliever to guide him to faith. And he chose to delay giving more guidance to someone who's already a believer. Now if it's presented to you like that, what do you think? Did the Prophet ﷺ make a mistake in judgment in terms of who he chose to speak to and give priority to? Did he make a mistake in judgment? Like, alright, so if you're in that situation, like imagine this, like someone's on the verge of becoming Muslim. Walid wasn't there, by the way. I'm giving you another scenario. He wasn't on the verge of becoming Muslim. He's an outright disbeliever and he chose to stay on disbelief. He wasn't any, but the Prophet doesn't know this. The Prophet doesn't know that Walid's not going to believe. He needs to make an effort, right? But if someone was on the verge of becoming Muslim, and then you have one of your one of your friends coming to ask you about something, hey, you know that issue, it's a fiqh issue, secondary issue, right? And he wants, you know how I should do this or do that, while you're in the middle of giving da'wah. What would you do? You're going to focus with your friend and leave this guy to get confused, what is fiqh and what are you guys talking about, and you're just going to leave him waiting there for a few, would you ever do this? Okay. So now, was the Prophet ﷺ's judgment and ijtihad illogical? No, of course not. But take a look at this. The Prophet ﷺ was taught a profound lesson, and we were taught after this. Da'wah is an art, and don't ever pass judgment on the results. The Prophet ﷺ thought that perhaps Al-Walid might believe, and of course, him believing or not is from ilm al-ghayb. He would never know unless Allah informs him. So, however, Allah in His ultimate knowledge knew that Al-Walid will not believe. And He knew that where the real benefit lies is with Ibn Maktoum. Right? He knew that the one who's actually going to be much more beneficial to the da'wah is this one who's already a believer. Because that one, it's going to be a useless discussion. It's going to be a dead end. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving wisdom to His Prophet. Don't think that the results are always as they seem, especially in da'wah. And you know what? If you engage in da'wah, you actually realize this. You know how many stories are out there of people being guided when they weren't actually intended by the message at all? They weren't this, I know of one of these stories. A person was speaking to someone about Islam, and there was someone at a close distance listening. This person they were speaking to actually didn't become Muslim. That person who heard ended up going to do more research. He was inspired by the conversation, and that person became Muslim and actually approached this brother, and he said, I heard you talking about Islam with another person, and that was the beginning of my route to guidance. There was actually another interesting story I know from another brother who was giving da'wah, who he gave some reading materials to someone to take with them home. This person gave no attention to it, threw it on the side in the house. Someone in the home found this reading material, picked it up, started reading about Islam, and they ended up being guided to Islam because of something that was thrown around in the house. You don't know. You really don't know how da'wah is going to end up. So this is one thing that the Prophet ﷺ is taught through this situation with Al-Walid and Sayyidina Ibn Maktoum. You don't know where the true benefit lies. Don't ever treat situations as though you do, right? Be very careful and mindful because things might end up contrary to what you assume. That's another wisdom that we're taught through this situation. Now there's a lot here there's that we're taught in terms of the concept of ijtihad. The Prophet made an ijtihad here, right? And we know that in terms of ijtihad, what we're supposed to follow is what appears. And that's why the Prophet wasn't wrong. The Prophet wasn't wrong. Because we need to follow what's apparent. We don't know the unseen. So we need to follow what's clear and evident from situations. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ teaches us here. And that's why he gave focus to Al-Walid. So he actually wasn't reprimanded because of this. Pay attention to that. He wasn't actually reprimanded because of his judgment. He was reprimanded because of his reaction. And his reaction, was it sinful? No, it wasn't sinful. It was contrary to what's preferred. Do prophets commit sins? In our belief, what do you guys think? Can prophets commit sins? Can prophets commit sins? Minor sins, yes? How many of you say yes? Raise your hand. All right, a few of you say yes, minor sins. Why do you say minor sins? Do you have an example? لِمَ تُحَرِّمُ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ لَكَ. Okay, maybe another better example would be Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. Adam disobeyed his Lord. Alright, so actually mainstream scholars, they say, mainstream scholarship, there's a difference of opinion on this issue. Major sins, absolutely not. Sins that compromise the message, absolutely not. Like what? What is a sin that would compromise the message? A lie. Can a prophet ever tell a lie? No. Because if they lie once, what are people going to say? I can't trust this guy's message. Maybe he's lying. Maybe he lied a few times. How do I know? Treachery. Would a prophet ever commit betrayal? No. Never. Why? Because if he committed betrayal once, he'll do it again. Right? And other examples are things that are debased, lowly. Like we would never believe. That's why, like what other faith traditions say about Prophet Ibrahim, they say that he had a child from wedlock. About Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam. Of course not. A'udhu billah. We would never say such a thing about Prophet Ibrahim. Because if a Prophet Ibrahim did that, what are people going to say? I've never fornicated in my life. Why should I follow someone who fornicated? Right? There would be no proof against people if prophets would do major sins like that. And that's why there's like about Lut alayhi salam. What other faith traditions say about Lut? The incest and what he did with his daughters. No, a'udhu billah. We would never say that about Prophet Lut alayhi salam. Why? Because that takes away from the sanctity and the preserved nature of the message. We're going to be done in a few minutes. Right? 5 minutes, we're done. Right? 5 minutes and we're done. Count. 9:22, 9:27, inshallah we're done. So anyway, focus with me here. In terms of minor sins, can they do it? Some scholars say yes, most scholars say no. No. Most scholars, they say no, they can't do minor sins. What about وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى? They say this is before prophethood. What's the proof? The next verse after that. ثُمَّ اجْتَبَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْهِ وَهَدَى. اجْتَبَاهُ meaning he chose him to become a prophet. As for Yunus alayhi salam and what he did, after Yunus alayhi salam and what he did, this was a mistake in judgment. He didn't defy Allah, but he left without permission. He thought that that's what was to be done because he saw the rain clouds of the clouds of punishment brewing. So he thought that he was to leave. He thought that was the directive. So it was a mistake. And then you'll find other examples. That's how they do it, these explanations. Now, quickly so we could finish in 4 minutes now. Why didn't Allah just reveal this to His Prophet? Here's another critical question. Alright? Couldn't Allah just tell His Prophet, hey, Walid ibn Mughira is not going to believe. Focus on Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Couldn't He have done that? Couldn't He have done that? Right? He could have. Why didn't He do that? Why didn't He do that? It's a good question, right? It's a good question to think about. Why didn't Allah just reveal to His Prophet? Huh? Because of the da'wah? No, not because of the da'wah. Because it was a teaching opportunity. Because when the Prophet ﷺ was corrected in such a manner, it would be arsakh and more confirmed and more established when the situation. The Prophet ﷺ was. Did the Prophet ﷺ do ijtihad? Yeah, he did. Ijtihad is to exert yourself, your effort in certain conclusions. He would make ijtihad and then wahi would come directing him, either agreeing with him or correcting him to modify certain things. The Prophet ﷺ did this. So he said here that the reason why the Prophet ﷺ wasn't informed was so that he could learn it through experience. Same thing with Musa alayhi salam with Al-Khadr. Musa alayhi salam was told to go meet Al-Khadr and learn from him things. So then Khadr told him, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. How are you going to be patient with that which you haven't experienced? Why didn't Allah just teach Musa these things? Because growing through experience has an invaluable and more deeper impact and effect on the individual than anything else. So that's the next critical question. Now, of course, as we said, we learn a lot of principles from the Prophet ﷺ's judgment. First off, judge on what is apparent. Number two is درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المصالح. Pushing away harm is given precedence to achieving benefits. This is a principle in Islamic law. This is what the Prophet was doing when he focused with Al-Walid, because he was trying to push away a harm, and that is disbelief. And that's why he delayed focusing with Ibn Maktum, because he was already a believer. So that's a principle that they derive from this surah. So now the next critical question is, how has Allah summarized life's journey? This is zooming ahead. We're done with this part. Now the next part, beautiful verses. All right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُتِلَ الْإِنسَانِ. After, because we said Al-Walid didn't believe, right? So those following verses, by the way, كَلَّا إِنَّهَا تَذْكِرَةٌ. So Allah is telling His Prophet, don't pay any attention or any heed. This is a reminder. Even if Al-Walid didn't purify himself and accept this message, the reminder still stays. It is in preserved tablets. We're honored by Islam. We're honored by being linked with Islam. Islam is not honored by us. So في صحف مكرمة مرفوعة مطهرة. All of this is speaking about how Islam is honored, whether people believe in it or not. Right? Then Allah summarizes His existence. Allah says, قُتِلَ الْإِنسَانِ. May the human being be ruined. How disbelieving he is. مَا أَكْفَرَهُ. How disbelieving he is. مِنْ أَيِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ. Look at this. Now, what did He create him from? Now here's a summary of existence in one line. مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ خَلَقَهُ فَقَدَّرَهُ. He created him from a sperm cell and proportioned him. Alright? ثُمَّ what? No, ثُمَّ السَّبِيلَ يَسَّرَهُ. Then He enabled him to become independent and function in this world. Right? ثُمَّ السَّبِيلَ يَسَّرَهُ. ثُمَّ أَمَاتَهُ فَأَقْبَرَهُ. Then He will cause him to die and be put in his grave. And then ثُمَّ إِذَا شَاءَ أَنْشَرَهُ. And then when He decrees, He'll bring him forth. Allahu Akbar. You go look how long it is in the Quran, the normal Mus'haf that we have, the Medina print of the Mus'haf. One line. One beautiful line. From a sperm cell to resurrection. One line. Ya Allah. And then, why mention so how has Allah summarized life's journey? That's how it's been summarized. And then in the end of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reflects on the process of vegetation. Hey, everything has a process. Da'wah has a process, Da'wah has a process. Inviting people has a process. Growth has a process. The Prophet ﷺ learned from this situation. There's a reason why Allah mentioned the process of vegetation. Everything in life is based on a process. If you're not willing to be sold on the process and you want everything to happen immediately, believe in a day and night, believe in it within a night, or for your circumstance to change for the better in a moment, then you're going to feel a great sense of failure. Oh no, it's 28. Alright, the reflections on the Day of Judgment is in the end of this surah. Allah tells us it's a very selfish reality. You know why? On that day people will realize what really matters most. I don't want to go to hell. They're going to run away from their closest, most intimate relationships. Their parents, their siblings. They're going to run away from everyone. I don't want to go to hell. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ. In the end, brothers and sisters, there's two results. He says, وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ يَوْمَئِذٍ وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ إيه؟ مُسْفِرَةٌ ضَاحِكَةٌ مُسْتَبْشِرَةٌ. On that day, there will be faces that are illuminating with light, rejoicing, happy. That's one result. وَوُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَلَيْهَا غَبَرَةٌ. Other faces will be darkened, depressed, gloomy from their end result. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of those faces that are bright and happy on the Day of Judgment, not those that are regretful. Jazakumullah khair for your patience. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us all. And if you have any questions, you could come up here and ask me, inshaAllah. Or you could put it in the WhatsApp group later on. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Al-'asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullah.